Father who is in heaven, that one of these little ones should perish.
Hey everybody, my name is Gabe Hannenkamp,
And this is Abigail Herman.
and welcome to Iron Sparks.
Oh.
This is episode number 6, and we are branching out a little bit on this one. We're talking about, rather than the kind of scriptural themes that we've been discussing before, rather than those kind of broader topics, we're really going to narrow in here on a important kind of more cultural, moral issue. A little closer to current events type stuff, more of the world around us.
More apologetic based.
More kind of apologetics type things, because we want to branch out. We want to be able to do basically anything we want to talk about. I'll be honest.
We talked about Disney songs last episode.
That's true. We did talk about Disney songs. I mean, we're being honest, guys. This podcast is just really the stuff that we want to talk about and an excuse to talk about it. So
exactly.
Glad you're along for the ride. So, I do want to say, before we get into this episode, we're going to be, it's abortion, right?
Yeah.
And anyone who knows anything about abortion on either side knows that this conversation is going to involve some pretty dark stuff.
Yeah.
We're probably going to get into some things that aren't especially PG rated.
Yeah.
So if your stomach isn't feeling too solid at the moment, or maybe you got some young kids in the room, something like that, might want to save this one for another time, because I don't exactly know how deep we're going to go on some things, but it could be...
It could get really deep and really dark really fast.
Yeah, it doesn't take much with this issue, strangely. No. So, yeah, and also I just want to address that we are sending this out a day late. There's an explanation on the Facebook page for y'all who follow the Facebook page. I'm talking to both of you. And so... life happens, and I've been sick for the last week, which is the big reason. So if my voice sounds scratchy and terrible, I apologize. Try not to think about it too much. So, abortion.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It is literally a life or death issue.
A life or death issue, which... is why I think there are a lot of different issues going on in our culture right now. Not just, I'm not even just talking about American culture right now, but like worldwide culturally, there are a lot of things going on, a lot of big controversial issues. But I think abortion is the one that kind of stands out for me, because it is a life or death issue. And it's not just a life or death issue, but it's a life or death issue on a massive scale. Like, according to the World Health Organization, an average of 73 million babies, fetuses, whatever you want to call them, fetus being essentially Latin for baby, but 73 million babies are aborted every single year worldwide, which I knew that the number was high, but I looked up that stat for this episode and I was like, holy wow, because it is 73 million a year, which equates to 3 in 10 pregnancies. 3 out of 10 pregnancies worldwide are aborted. 30% of people are killed in our world right now. 30% are killed before they even reach the world. Just think about that. Just think about that.
Yeah.
That is an incredibly heavy thing, which I think I'm guilty of this too. I think a lot of people have become numb to that these days, because we just hear about it all the time. And like I was listening to someone talk about this the other day, and they were addressing someone who basically I'm blanking on their name now, but anyway, they basically said, do we have to keep talking about this? I think it was a senator who brought this up. He's like, do we have to keep talking about the issue of abortion? I'm tired of talking about it. I want to move on to other things. And I'm like, yes, we have to continue talking about the issue of abortion, because we can't ignore that 3 in 10 people are being killed.
Yeah.
It's not something that we can ever ignore. It's not something we can ever let slide.
Yeah. And of course, that makes it an inherently very sensitive
yes.
issue, because you're telling a mother that she killed her child in her womb, which that's insanely heartbreaking. Especially, so my heart definitely goes out to any woman who has had a miscarriage. That's horrible. That's terrible. And then this is almost even worse, especially if a woman has an abortion early in life and then goes on later to have kids. All of a sudden, she sees the product of her womb and she's like, wait a second. If I had not killed that child, I would have had that child with me. And so, especially when talking with, so statistically, probably the majority of people who are talking about abortion, or at least they are somehow affected by abortion, whether that's they're a grandmother who said, no, I don't want a grandchild out of wedlock, whether they are a boyfriend who said, I don't want to take care of a child right now, or whether they're the woman who said, I don't want to take care of a child right now.
Right.
All of that, statistically very probable that the majority of people that you're going to talk about about this issue are going to have some experience with that. And so that makes it very important to talk with them on a logical level, but understanding the emotions that might be behind it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Because, again, it is a deeply emotional thing. I mean, you cannot get more personal and more emotional than terminating your own child inside of you, than killing your own child inside it. Like, I mean, I've never been pregnant.
You never will be.
I never will be, because men can't get pregnant. That's a different issue. But it's such an incredibly personal and emotional issue. And again, if 3 in 10 pregnancies end this way, you have to expect that almost anyone you meet, anyone you're talking about this issue with, is probably going to have at least some connection to abortion, whether they were personally involved in it in some way, or if they had a family member who had an abortion or something like that. Like, almost anyone you talk to on this issue is going to have some, often very personal, connection to abortion, which is one big reason why this discussion can get so heated so quickly.
Yeah, 100%.
Why it can turn into all the shouting matches that you see on the internet whenever this issue is brought up, because it is, I mean, even all of the people who reject that an unborn fetus is a human child, which biologically it is, but those who reject that, even people who say it doesn't matter, who say it's just a clump of cells, it doesn't have any effect on me to kill it, it's just it's like removing my appendix, like it's no big deal. It is a big deal, and they know it's a big deal, and you can tell, because the women who have had this procedure, even the ones who intellectually say that it helped them, that it was easy, that it made things easier for her, like, you can see the hurt in these people and the way that it affects them.
And it makes them fight harder, because they say, well, I was right to get an abortion, and you're right to get an abortion. And so they want to feel right about getting their abortion. And that's why they fight so hard about it, because they can't admit to themselves that they killed their child.
Right. Yeah.
And it's hurtful and harmful for you to say, no, you did kill their child, according to them.
Right.
But we cannot look sin in the face and call it not sin.
Right.
That is one of the big issues that we need to address too, in many areas of the church.
Yeah. And anyway, so when you're talking about, we're going to address things, I think largely we're going to address them very blatantly here. We're going to be very straightforward, very truthful, because this is a good environment to do that.
Yeah.
But if you are ever having this conversation with someone in person, over coffee, whatever it may be, if you're ever actually talking to someone about this issue in a meaningful way, be very, very careful, and don't compromise on the truth. Don't lie to them, nothing like that.
Yeah.
But be very discerning, very tactful in the way that you address these things.
Yeah.
Don't just throw lists of facts at them.
Yeah.
Don't don't call them a murderer. Don't do anything to alienate them or make them hate you, because that's just going to make things infinitely worse for both of you.
And reach out to them, especially if they had an abortion. Reach out to them. I mean, again, don't lie, but be there for them when they realize the truth and they are crying in your arms. And I would say, I don't know, it would be hard for a man to or maybe, I don't know.
I think there is definitely a place to say that women have a much better voice in this issue than men do in a lot of ways. But that does not mean that men can't have an opinion.
No, I agree with you. I mean that for a woman to open up, it would be a lot harder for her to open up to a man.
Absolutely.
So if you are a man discussing this with a woman, I would say be very careful.
Yes, be careful.
Because, again, they say no uterus, no voice.
Yes, they make that argument a lot. Maybe we'll get into that more later.
Yeah, maybe we'll get into that more later. But again, that is wrong. But again, also understand that sometimes a woman just needs a woman to cry with. So.
Right. Yeah. Women are weird, guys. Don't try to understand them. Just do your best. And I don't know. I'm not good with women advice. So just be careful when addressing this issue is what we're trying to say, because it is very important and it hits very, very close to home for a lot of people. So just share the truth in love.
Yeah.
Don't be a jerk. Please don't be a jerk. That's really the key part of this. Don't be a jerk. As long as you are careful, as long as you are gentle, as long as you have compassion for them and are saying what you're saying out of love and out of a desire to help them reconcile with what they've done, I think you'll be just fine.
Yeah.
But that being said, the question of abortion it's a complicated question and there are a lot of facets to it, but there are really three main issues that you have to, three main questions that you have to answer when you're thinking about this issue and when you're having this conversation with people, because I haven't had a lot of opportunities to have conversations with people on the other side on this issue. But I've done a lot of research into this over the past couple of years. I've seen a lot of conversations. Jeff Durbin of Apologia Studios, if you go to the Apologia Studios YouTube channel, there are a lot of videos on there of him just out on the street at protests, at clinics, just talking to people about this stuff. I highly recommend that if you want to get a taste of what a lot of these conversations are actually like. But when these conversations come up, there are really three things that you have to get straight, that you have to iron out before any real kind of conversation can take place. And I really like to narrow it down to these three questions. The first and the central question is abortion murder, right? Is abortion the terminating of the killing of a valuable, complete human being? Is it equivalent to killing someone? Is it equivalent to killing an infant? Is it equivalent to killing an adult? Is it the same as killing anybody else? Is it murder? That's the first question you have to answer. And a lot of people differ on that, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But once you answer that question on whether or not it's murder, or whether or not the person you're talking to thinks it's murder, then there are two more questions you have to answer. If it's not murder, why isn't it murder? What makes it so that it's either not the killing of something, I guess, or it's not a human being that's being killed. It's not a full person, a valuable person that's being killed. It's something else. And why is that? And what makes it that way?
Yeah.
How do you even define what a full person really is?
Yeah.
That's really where it comes down to with a lot of people on this issue, is what do they define as a person, and is that a defensible position? Is that a defensible definition? So that's one of the questions. And if it is murder, which a lot of people will kind of digress to that, I guess, and say, yes, I think it is the killing of a human being, but it's still justifiable because X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who have a lot of justifications for why a woman should be allowed to abort her child, even though it is a fully valuable human being. There are a lot of justifications that people come up for that. So really, when you're having these conversations, when you're talking about this issue, you have to think about, is abortion murder? And whatever the answer is there, either if it is not, why is it not? And what makes it not the killing of a fully valuable person? And if it is murder or might be murder, then why do you think it should still be allowed, still be legal, still be justified? And there are a lot of things I could say on this, but before we get too deep into the intricacies of kind of the cultural arguments that are used about all of these different things, this is a Christian environment, right? And so before I kind of get into arguing against abortion, essentially, I want to really dive into what is our foundation as Christians for arguing against abortion. What is it that we have to stand on and say, no, this is wrong?
Yeah.
Because as Christians, we have a unique foundation in the inspired word of Scripture that allows us to stand on God's word, to stand on what God says about things. And that's what allows us to make declarations about things like abortion, transgenderism, who should use what bathroom, like we can make definitive declarations on a lot of things that other people can't based on nothing but this book, which a lot of people say is ridiculous, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, probably the one that immediately pops into most people's minds is the one that is most often quoted about this, which is Psalms 139, verses 13 through 16, which says, "For you have formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them."
I mean, that seems pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah.
God knitted us together in our mother's womb. He created us and knew the intricacies of who we were and had planned out every single step that we would ever take before we were even born, before we, came through the magic birth canal and became people, right? There was no magic point at which God suddenly recognized us as a person. As we were in our mother's womb, as God was knitting us together, as he already knew exactly who we were and exactly who we would become. That's when we were alive. That's when we became people. That's when we became image bearers of God. And I don't see any biblical argument against that. You can make lots of extra biblical arguments against that, and that's what we'll get into later. But biblically, if you're going to be an honest biblical Christian, I don't think there's any consistent position you can take except for the pro-life one, the anti-abortion one, because it's so clear to me that, I mean, what we just read is true.
Yeah.
That if God knew exactly who we were, he was knitting us together.
Yeah.
I don't know what could be more valuable than that.
Yeah. And I mean, even in Genesis 1, we see, okay, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
Right.
So humans, in the beginning, God made them in their image. Why would it be any different at any point today?
Yeah, why would it be any different? I mean, And that's the strange thing too, is even at the moment of conception, at the moment when the two gametes come together and form a new thing, a new zygote, you are immediately unique, you are immediately distinct, genetically and in the eyes of God, as a unique human being created in his image, as a single tiny little speck, not even visible with the naked eye. You are already in the image of God. And we're already valued as such. And when I say valued as such, as people who are created in the image of God, we have value, we have a dignity that is allotted to us, and there are consequences for destroying that. Genesis chapter 9 verse 6 says, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image." Right? There are consequences for destroying an image bearer of God. And I think we're starting to see those consequences around us today as 3 in 10 image bearers are destroyed. It's not good. It's not good. And yeah, I don't understand why it's so hard for people to see. And it deeply saddens me that we've become so blind to this truth and to what makes us human, and to what being human even means. Because I don't know. We'll get into this more later, but people have such arbitrary ideas of what being a person is these days, and it makes me so sad and so disgusted with what humanity has become in our fallen world. But thankfully, as Christians, we have these truths to stand on. We have these reminders of God and of what he created, and of who we are, and of when we became who we are. And that, I think, is incredibly comforting. But
I mean, God commissioned Jeremiah while he was still in the womb, as it says in Jeremiah 1:5. "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations."
Right.
So before he was born, before he formed you in the womb, before he formed him in the womb. I mean, obviously, that's talking about God's predestination and his understanding and his foreknowledge.
Right.
But I concentrated you before you were born.
Right. Before you were born. Like, how do you get more clear than that? Right? He was consecrated, named a prophet to the nations in the womb. God obviously recognized that there was some unique value there, that there was an image bearer of God there that he could, I guess, speak to in that way, that he could consecrate in that way before he was born. I mean, I think of, I can't think of the passage now, but when Mary meets the mother of John the Baptist. In
Luke, I think.
In Luke, yeah. Go look that up for yourselves, because I'm blanking on the reference right now. But when John the Baptist in the womb recognizes Jesus also in the womb and starts, kicking and like, jumping for joy in the womb, essentially, like they're people. Right? And they have the value that a person has. And they have the ability that a person has to be recognized by God and to be, I hesitate to say respected by God, because I that has different implications, but to be respected in that way as a unique image bearer of God. And it's just amazing to me. And even not even just in this kind of spiritual sense that we've been talking about, but even in a judicial sense, the Bible talks about children in the womb having value. Like in Exodus chapter 21, starting in verse 22, and it says, "When men strive together, and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall oppose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Right?
Yeah.
That's pretty extreme. Like,
yeah.
The obvious implications of that is that in Levitical law, in ancient Israelite law, which, God wrote, obviously.
Yeah.
The life of an unborn child was considered equal to the life of the mother who carried that child. Which seems like the most basic thing ever, but that's what we're struggling so hard for right now, is the idea that a mother and her child should be equally valued is just lost. And I can't, although it's not entirely lost, I do have to say, because I can't remember exactly how many states it is now. Some states have repealed this law, but the vast majority of states, if you kill a pregnant woman, it is still considered double homicide. It's still considered 2 murders and not 1, because it wasn't the mother's choice, and so the unborn baby has value, I guess, which is just amazing to me that we could be so inconsistent.
Yeah. I mean, we know life when we see it, we just don't value it as we should.
Right.
And clearly the unborn is life. And it's not life. I mean, obviously the woman is providing life, but the woman does not give life to the child. God gives life to any child that is born and any child that is not born. He is the one who is in control of that. And the woman provides a vessel. Like, obviously, she's pretty much providing the life, and that's why abortion is possible, because if she stops providing food and nutrition to the child, then that child will die.
Right.
But God gives the life. And it's not our decision when to deprive it and when to not.
Yeah. It's like my pastor likes to say, forgive my use of language here, but he likes to say, people choose when to make love. God chooses when to make life, right? Life is a unique gift from God. It cannot exist without him. And when he does choose to bring it into existence, it is not our place to choose when to take it away. At least, well, and there's some areas.
I mean, even the verse that we read in 9:6, whoever sheds the life, sheds the blood of the man, by man shall his blood be shed. So there's a place for killing someone, but murder is never okay.
Murder is never okay, and that's what I think I'm trying to get across too, is killing the innocent is never justifiable, right? Killing, not that anyone's technically truly innocent, because we still have original sin, we still have all these things, but what I'm trying to say is God who sets the standards for when people should live or die. We have his law both in the Old and New Testament about when those things should take place, and it is up to us to follow God's discretion on those issues and not ours.
Because why are people valuable? Because they are made in God's image. We did not give ourselves value. God gave us value, and he's the one who can say, well, you are valuable, but now you're going to die.
Right. Yeah. It's insane to me. But I did want to hit on just one more passage real quick, because I stumbled upon this one as I was doing research for this episode, and it blew my mind just a little bit. And it's Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 5, which says, "As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything."
Yeah.
And I just read that, and I was like, I don't know how much clearer you could get about how special it is and how wonderful it is when the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, when this and it even says in this verse, that's like an incomprehensibly amazing thing.
Yeah.
like something we can't even fathom, the uniqueness and the just God's power and grace being shown in that way.
Yeah.
In the creation of life. It's an amazing thing and a horrifying thing that we've gotten so committed to destroying it as a society.
Yeah.
To discounting that creation of life in the womb and, you know, jumping between, oh, it's this thing, oh, it's this thing, oh, it's this thing, like making up excuses in order to allow us to snuff out that unique person that God brought into existence.
Yeah. And diminishing God's value on everyone, because any argument you make can be applied and may even already be applied to people outside of the womb, people who have already been born, and that's horrendous too. But
oh yeah. And with that, now that I think we pretty solidly, at least as much as we can in a brief amount of time, solidified the Christian foundation for this, the biblical foundation for this argument, and kind of what we're standing on as we kind of press out into the culture and deal with this issue. I kind of want to get deeper into the questions we talked about earlier and how we address them and how the sorts of things that people use to argue back at us and maybe the arguments that you use if you're on the opposite side. I don't know.
Yeah.
But whatever side you're on, hopefully this at least gets you thinking.
Yeah.
And I assume you're on my side if you've made it this far, but if not,
probably the majority of you are. And if any of you aren't, congratulations, you have made it to this part of the episode. You're going to get really mad, but that's okay.
Or maybe you won't get really mad, and that's great
that'd
too.
That'd be great too.
That would be awesome if we could have respectful discussions about
that.
That
would
be amazing. But anyway, so as we kind of dive into this, I talked about three kind of main points, right? Is abortion murder? And if so, or if not, why isn't it murder? And if so, why should it still be allowed? And the first question, the fundamental question, is abortion murder? Pretty easy one to, get the answer for if you're talking to someone, right? Is abortion murder? You're usually going to get a very visceral no, followed by maybe some expletives, who knows. But if you kindly ask the question, you get the answer, is abortion murder, you can kind of go from there.
Yeah.
And even if they, if you don't explicitly ask the question, is abortion murder, you can get into, is abortion the termination of a human life? Is abortion wrong?
Yeah.
Is even just a nicer way to phrase it. Like, should abortion be allowed? Like, do you think it's a good thing? Because there are a lot of people who argue that it should be allowed, who say it's not a good thing, I don't like it, but I think it should be allowed. So that's really the first thing you have to get into is, are they really pro-abortion? Do they really think that it's a good thing that should be happening? Or do they have doubts? Do they think it might be a human? Do they think it might be a bad thing, but they think it should still be allowed because of X, Y, or Z? So that's really what you have to get into is, do they think it's wrong?
Yeah.
And sometimes that takes some digging to get there, but if you're patient, if you're gentle with the conversation, you can usually get them to admit, yeah, I think it's right, or yeah, I think it's wrong.
Yeah.
And once you've gotten there, you can kind of dive deeper into what their arguments really are. Because a lot of the time, we're going to get into a lot of different arguments we're really hitting a lot of the really common arguments that people like to use. And a lot of the time, people will actually start throwing the arguments about why it is bad but shouldn't be allowed, or why it is bad but should be allowed, or why it isn't bad. Like, they'll start throwing the arguments at you before they actually admit to whether or not they think it's wrong.
Yeah. And
so you kind of have to push through the weeds a little bit to get to that central question before you can really answer all of their other questions properly. But once you get there, once you can really narrow down where exactly they're coming from, then you can start to get to a lot of these other issues and a lot of these other questions that we're going to talk about. But once you have that one answered, at least as best as you can, there are a lot of other things that people like to throw at you. So if you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, and they say, yes, I think abortion is good. Yes, I think abortion should be allowed. Yes, I think that abortion is a morally unreprehensible thing, that it's not immoral. There are a lot of things that they use to defend that.
Yeah.
Right? So once you've narrowed down their central position, there are a lot of things that they will throw at you in order to defend that central position.
Yeah.
And usually, almost universally, the arguments for why it is morally good come down to, well, it's not actually a person.
Yeah.
Because biologically, it is a human being at that point. It has all of the DNA of a human. It has unique DNA. Mm-hmm. It has everything planned out, even for the structures that haven't been formed yet, you know?
Yeah.
Like, anything that will ever happen to you genetically is planned out at that stage.
Yeah.
And you are genetically fully human.
Yeah.
Biologically, you are recognized as a human being. But there are a lot of people who acknowledge that, but like to argue for various different things that make you not actually a fully valuable person, not actually a functioning, maybe thinking or feeling human being.
Right. And one of the big ones is quote unquote viability.
Right.
Where they say, oh, well, a baby can't survive without its mother from this point to this point. So, therefore, since the baby is dependent on the mother has the right to kill the baby.
Right. Yeah, they really like the viability argument. And really, we're going to get into a couple different things, but really, when you're thinking about this, they're really just saying, if they're going to make the argument, conception is not when human life starts. Mm-hmm. You are a human biologically and you are alive, but you don't have personhood yet, is what they like to say. So they don't think personhood, quote unquote, starts at conception, right? Mm-hmm. And so they set other lines like, okay, when you cross this line, now you're a person. When you cross this line, now you're a person.
Yeah.
And so the line that a lot of people like to set for their arguments is viability. Can you survive outside of the womb without being directly connected to the mother?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of different things that they use to kind of flesh out this argument. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the time, it just comes down to things like consent. Like, you can't use a woman's body without her consent, right? The woman has to consent to the use of her body. I'm saying the word consent over and over again because they say the word consent over and over again.
Yeah.
So it's consent, right? Consent is really central to every part of the often secular worldview around this stuff.
Which is ironic because the baby didn't ask to be put in there, and there's only one way for the baby to get in there. So who had consent?
Right. And there is definitely a point to be made for that, because a lot of people, they point out like, well, you talk about a baby being the same as adult human being. This is one of the arguments that gets used a lot, so I'll just try to state it as best I can. Well, if you talk about a fetus being the same as an adult human being, well, if someone got into a car accident, let's say someone got into a car accident, and the only way for them to survive, and let's say that they could, move on with their life later, but the only way for them to survive for now is they strap you down to a bed next to them and hook them up to you, and you have to keep them alive. Wouldn't that be a violation of your rights? And I'm like, yes, it would be, because that's not what motherhood is. Yeah. Motherhood, and they like to say this, like, you obviously think that one person's body can't be used to keep another person's body alive without their consent, except in this one case. Like, you're being inconsistent.
Well,
you're making inconsistent arguments. And honestly, the answer is yes, because motherhood is completely unique.
Different. Yeah,
there's nothing.
Yeah.
You can think of any number of analogies, and they don't work.
Yeah.
Because motherhood is fundamentally a unique thing.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about motherhood, you can't get lost in the weeds talking about these other crazy, like I've heard entire debates on abortion that were literally just both sides throwing ridiculous hypotheticals at one another. And I'm like, you're completely missing the mark on every single one of these, because not a single one of these is motherhood.
Yeah.
Because a mother,
it's just different. So here's the thing. Adam said to Eve when he saw her for the first time, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. That's what it is in motherhood. A child is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Obviously, never been pregnant, never had a kid. But if I were to get pregnant, I could rightly say that to my child.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an intimate relationship. Like, obviously not sexually, that would be weird.
Right.
But it's because you're carrying a human being inside of you for 9 months. Like, you feel every little kick, you can feel them breathing. Not breathing, sorry, that doesn't work in there. No.
Yeah.
But you can feel them before anyone else can.
Right.
You're so close to the child.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's completely different. Also because any child that is in there, again, number one, was put there by God, but number two, there's a reason that child is in there.
Right. Yes. And the thing really is too, I think the most fundamental difference between motherhood and the car accident analogy or whatever else you want to use is that motherhood is fundamentally a natural process. Yeah. Right? Yeah. The whole process of sex and procreation, all that stuff, perfectly natural. And it can be subverted in a lot of terrible ways. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into some of that a little bit later. But the point is, motherhood, having that baby inside of you, right? Mm-hmm. Feeding off of you, if you want to say it that way, is a completely natural thing. And ending that is a termination of a natural process. Yeah. If you were to strap someone down to a table and hook them up to your veins and say, you're keeping me alive now, that wouldn't be natural. That would be a fundamentally unnatural and perverted thing to do. Yeah. But that's not the case in motherhood. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to say that it is, I think you have a lot of other things that you have to back up first.
Yeah. So
that's really the fundamental difference. Is motherhood is, first of all, your fault in 98% of cases, 99% of cases. It's somewhere in that range. It's very, very, very high. And even when it's not, or even when it's tough, you can't say that just because I didn't consent to this new person using my body, I can kill them. Yeah. That's really the fundamental thing here. Yeah. Is you can say, okay, maybe it's rough that she has this pregnancy that she doesn't want. That's a really tough thing. That's a complicated thing. And we'll get into that more later. But that does not justify killing a human being. And that's not... And that we got a little bit off track there too. Yeah. But, and again, the question we're really trying to answer is that a human being? And why is it a human being and why isn't it a human being? Mm-hmm. And so the viability argument is really, because this thing relies on me, because it has to have my consent to live, essentially, I should have the ability to kill it, right? That's the fundamental argument that we've been kind of circling around. Yeah. And that's obviously ridiculous. Yeah. Because anyone who has ever had anything to do with a newborn knows that newborn absolutely has to have its caretaker's consent to live.
Yeah. Feeding, diaper, bed. Yeah.
Right. Like, there's nothing that is unique about an unborn baby's dependence on the mother. Yeah. Right? I mean, technically, yes, they're physically connected, although that kind of happens after birth too. But the point is, if your argument is that anyone, especially a baby, who is entirely dependent on the mother to live you should be allowed to kill them because of that dependence.
Yeah.
It's clearly just, it's obviously ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because you could make that argument for anything.
Yeah.
Right?
And they make it for older people too, who depend on other people to live their lives because they don't have the same functions as they did before. And up in Canada, that's another huge problem. Again, different topic, but I guess that just shows how this culture that we're making around this abortion issue is kind of bleeding over into other things. We're like, oh, hey, you know what? Old people are almost entirely dependent on their caretakers. We should kill them too.
Right. Yeah.
How ridiculous is that?
And that's a terrible thing. And I will say, because we're on this topic, we're talking about, I've just gone on about how if someone is completely if someone cannot survive on their own, essentially, if they are completely dependent on someone or something else to keep them alive, we should not be allowed to kill them, right? That's the argument I've been making. We shouldn't be allowed to kill those people.
Yeah.
But they bring up the point a lot of people who are on life support, right? Of people who are maybe in a coma or a vegetative state or whatever they may be in, people who are hooked up to a machine that is keeping them alive and probably don't even have any knowledge that this is happening anymore.
Yeah.
People who are essentially just vegetables. And because they are fully dependent on machines to keep them alive, whatever, the family is often given the choice of how long they want to keep them on life support before they pull the plug, right? And so they say, well, if we're allowed to pull the plug on someone who's in a coma or whatever, in a vegetative state, then why shouldn't we be allowed to abort people who are in, you could say a similar situation. I'd say it's actually very different. But the argument they make is, well, this is basically the same thing, so why should we be allowed to kill this person but not the unborn child? And the answer is very fundamentally that if you don't kill the unborn baby, what happens in 95% of cases? The baby is born and becomes a healthy human being, right? Not always the case, but in the vast majority of cases with modern medicine, it is the case that without intervention, the baby will naturally be born and will naturally, live a life. Whereas in the case of someone who's on life support like that, if you remove the life support, if you don't intervene, the natural thing that will happen is death, right? It's the difference between preventing death, from holding them back from death and then letting them go if you don't think it's worth it anymore. And ending someone's chance to even have a life outside of the womb. Because naturally, they would just become one of us. And that's the real difference, is holding someone back from death is very different than holding someone back from life. Two fundamentally different situations.
And kind of a similar issue to viability is heartbeat or nose or eyes, or, I mean, they probably don't make those arguments, but some developmental stage that they say, oh, now they're human.
Right. Yeah.
Which again, how can you say, oh, now a heartbeat makes them human, but a second before they weren't human?
Right. Yeah, and it's just, lots of people set they're just setting lines, like you cross this line, you're a human, you cross this line, you're a human. A lot of people like to set what I consider very arbitrary lines medically. Like saying it's a heartbeat that makes you a person, right? It's a certain level of brain activity that makes you a person. It's the ability to feel pain that makes you a person, right? It's all these different stages that people come up with at different points in the growing process. Heartbeats around 6 weeks, brain activity that can be read on a monitor is 8 weeks. The ability to feel pain is probably 24 weeks, but it could be earlier than that. That's just when we definitely know that they can feel pain.
Yeah.
So a lot of people like to set very arbitrary lines, and I've never heard a good defense for any of them objectively. I mean, I've even heard someone argue. I saw someone arguing recently. It was in a debate. I can't remember the name of this lady. I'm blanking on her name now. But anyway, Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire did a debate with someone. You can go watch. I'm sure you can go find it on his YouTube channel, where one of the things she made as an argument was she pulled out these photos of a aborted fetus in a petri dish, which is horrifying in and of itself. But she was like, look at this. You can't even see it with your naked eye. And that was her argument for why it shouldn't matter. And I was like, so because you can't see someone, they're not a person. And Michael Knowles had all sorts of fun with this argument. He was like, well, if you walked all the way to the other side of the room, you'd be almost too small for me to see with the naked eye. Would you not be a person then? Like, you know, you like
can blind people kill everyone they know?
Yeah, right? Like, oh, I can't see you, so you must not be there. Like, it just this people use so many seemingly silly thing like that you can see, or like how like you wonder how can they think that this is a coherent position. But again, I think a lot of this stems just from how badly they need to be right, because what are the implications if they're wrong? Like, it's terrible implications if they're wrong. And so they make some what I frankly consider to be desperate arguments for why they are in the right.
And the next one is time limit. Some sort of time limit. Oh, the third month or the first trimester or the...
Right.
Why does being 2 months, 6 days, and 23 hours and 59 minutes old make you not human, but then add a single minute to that, and now all of a sudden you are human.
Right. Yeah. There's no magic time period for how long you've been in the womb that like suddenly then you're a person. It doesn't make any rational sense. Right. And I think that's with going back to the development thing a little bit for just a second, because something I don't think we addressed was, you have to understand too, when you're talking about time limits, stages of development, that sort of thing, the kind of the medical stages of development, and saying, well, in this stage of development, it's not a person. In this stage, it is. I think a lot of that also comes from a more materialist worldview. The idea that there is no soul, there is no consciousness separate from the fizzing chemicals in your brain, the functionality of your, I guess, your perception organs, you know? And so I think from a materialist worldview, these things actually can make more sense. The idea that, well, before you have a certain level of brain activity, you aren't an actual person because you can't think, so obviously you're not a person. Because, I mean, with our Christian and metaphysical idea of the soul being separate from our bodies, that doesn't make a lot of sense to us. But I think when you're engaging with these arguments with a lot of different people, you're going to have to get into that in some way, because a lot of these people are at least partially materialist in the way that they think about things. And so I think you have to address some aspects of that worldview before you can dive too deeply into some of these peculiar milestones that people set. Because if you already think that what makes you a person is entirely dependent on your body and the chemical processes in your body, that's going to dramatically shift the way that you look at issues like abortion. And so I think a lot of people who make those arguments are coming from that kind of side of it, and you're going to have to deal with those a little differently in that situation. And I think that's going to vary from person to person, and you're just going to have to try to roll with the punches, as it were. But that's just something I kind of wanted to go over, is you people with that kind of worldview are going to have a very different perspective on the kind of medical or time-related arguments. But considering that you're still a fully biological human being at conception, I think even materialist arguments based on biology and that sort of thing, I think they still fall apart pretty quickly, even from the materialist worldview. But you do have to address things in a different way if you're dealing with someone of that persuasion.
Yeah. And you do have to be careful too, especially because our culture is largely in previous times we are largely based on material atheist ideals, and now we move to kind of the feelings, and I feel this way, so I am this way, or whatever. Right. And so kind of the opposite side of that coin, you're going to meet both of these, is I have to feel right about my abortion, which we kind of already talked about a little bit.
Yeah.
And so they're going to reach for these metaphysical arguments because they kind of already understand them since we just came out of that. But yeah, again, so feelings are also very important in our culture. So
yeah. A lot of people are really into this kind of new age spirituality with their feelings and their emotions and their, I don't know, their chakras or whatever they like to talk about.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of, again, with, when I talked about kind of pushing to the central question and moving out from there, sometimes you have to push even deeper than that and get into what is this person's worldview? What is the system what is the framework they use to understand the world?
Yeah.
Because that's the framework in which they're going to build their arguments. And there are a lot of situations, and it's, again, going to vary from conversation to conversation, but I think there are a lot of situations in which you will have to address that foundational framework before you can actually get to the more specific issue of abortion. But that being said, coming back to kind of the trimester position, a lot of people like to use third trimester as the cutoff. A lot of governments like to use I don't know exactly what a lot of the legislations are, but a lot of them cut off at or before the third trimester. I think the vast majority of states cut off before then. There are only, I think, less than half a dozen that have the cutoff anywhere after that.
Yeah.
Very few states actually allow abortion all the way up until birth, which I find interesting. But the time limit thing, whether it be 20 weeks or whether it be the third trimester, whether it be whatever, I think that's honestly a pretty blatant, I don't know what to call it, but a pretty, you're basically admitting at that point that it's just, this is when I don't feel good about it anymore.
Yeah.
This is when it gets large enough or smart enough or
more human-like than I would like.
This is when it has enough human-like characteristics that I no longer feel comfortable seeing it killed.
Yeah.
Right? Because fundamentally, and it disgusts me to say this, but fundamentally, the reason that abortion is allowed in our culture and killing an infant is not because when you kill an unborn baby, you cannot hear it scream.
Yeah.
That is the fundamental difference.
Yeah.
You cannot hear it scream.
Yeah.
And then
cry.
Yeah. You can't see that it's there. You can't feel that it's there. I mean, unless you're the mother, and then you can feel that it's there in a lot of situations. But you can't fully perceive it, which allows enough people to push it off to the back of their minds that we've gotten to the place that we have, right? Yeah. And that's the fundamental reason that killing an infant is not allowed and killing an unborn infant is.
Yeah. Which reminds me of the movie Unplanned, which if you're going to watch it, ask your parents, or if you are a parent, it is an R rating because of the culture not wanting it out, and also because it's hard to see, because so this woman goes through 2 abortions herself, and she works in an abortion clinic, and then she sees the ultrasound of an abortion being done. And that's when her heart, it hits her. And I think at this point she has at least one child, and it hits her, and she realizes, oh, that's a kid. That's a baby.
Yep.
And so, again, bring the parents along.
Yes.
With that one. But,
yeah. But it's just, that's really the fundamental thing with all of these arguments for why it isn't a human being. The only reason that we can look at a fetus really in any stage of development and say that it's not a human being when a born baby is because we have a harder time perceiving it. Mm-hmm. We can only see them on pictures or on ultrasound screens or in plastic bags. And so it gives us a level of detachment that lets us ignore that it's a person. That's the fundamental difference. And you see a lot of like doctors who have to go through these procedures, like they see it, they know, they don't have that level of detachment.
Yeah.
And some of them are horrified by it, and some of them are so depraved that they just don't care.
Yeah.
But as regular citizens sitting in our homes or even having these procedures done, we don't have to see it.
Yeah.
We don't have to have that wall broken down.
Yeah.
And so we can kind of hide behind our screens and we can pretend that the problem doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to see it in front of us. Mm-hmm. Because it's hidden in someone's stomach or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, that's the fundamental basis for all of these arguments.
Mm-hmm.
The fundamental reason that anyone can say any of this and not be thrown in jail is because they're far enough removed from us that we can pretend that they're not human beings, which is dangerous and horrifying, but it's the reality that we live in today.
Yeah.
So we've addressed a lot of the arguments that people use to defend why they aren't human beings, why they aren't valuable, why abortion isn't morally wrong in some people's eyes, because they're not really people, right? And a lot of people use a lot of different standards for that and defend that in a lot of different ways. But there are a lot of people who, even if they don't openly admit that they think abortion is murder, they come up with they think that it's still wrong, and they don't like it.
Yeah.
And they don't even necessarily think that it's morally right or that it should happen, but they still think that the woman should have the right to choose. That's what they call it. They call it the right to choose. They don't even say the right to have an abortion. The right to choose, because again, it's that level of detachment.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't even want to say exactly what my position is because I'm uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
And I don't like that I'm having to defend it this way. So and those are the sorts of things that you can look for in these conversations too, are the places where you can see that people don't even like what they're saying.
Yeah.
Because again, we've talked about this a little bit before. We all still have that Romans 1 conscience. We have that Romans 1 perception of reality buried in us somewhere. Yeah. And in some of us, it's deeply suppressed. But others, you can see it peeking through the surface when people get uncomfortable with these kinds of arguments. And so they argue, in as detached a way as they can, that a woman should have the right to choose. And they use a lot of different things to say that women should have the right to choose. And fundamentally, the argument is giving birth to a child and caring for a child is really hard for women to do, and they shouldn't have to do that. That is the fundamental base of all of these other arguments that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Yep.
Really, the most basic level of it is giving birth to a child and taking care of that child is hard, and women shouldn't be, quote unquote, forced to do that.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people a lot of people basically just stop there.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of people are basically just like, giving birth to a child is a life-altering thing, right? Being pregnant is a life-altering thing. I'm not arguing with that. Like, it is probably one of the most fundamentally life-changing experiences that a person can go through.
Yeah. Yep.
And it can completely derail someone's life in a lot of ways. But that doesn't justify killing a child either. And, you know, a lot of people, they go to a lot of little points like, well, the child won't be in a solid, stable home, right? Oh, what if the mother can't afford to pay to care for the child? You know, what if the child is poor and miserable, or what if, you know, all of these bad things happen to the child after they're born because it's a bad situation. And, you know, I talked about Jeff Durbin a little bit earlier. He gets that argument a lot, and his response is more blatant than I would recommend using. But he just always answers with, so we should kill the poor kids? Because it's better for them to be dead than to be poor? And I've heard people say yes to that and say, yeah, I think that life is hard and people shouldn't have to go through that.
Yeah. Wow.
And look, I say being poor is better than being dead. That's my professional opinion.
Yep.
I think you can live a perfectly happy and fulfilling life with no money.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, ask any stable college student. It's just, and talking about broken homes even.
Yeah.
Broken homes, you know, single mothers who are forced to give birth to these children, maybe, like those sorts of things. They're really hard. Mm-hmm. They can be really damaging to people. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, they can mess you up. But I have also seen and heard so many stories of people coming out of those situations and doing such amazing things that I can't see that as any kind of argument for why people should be killed. Like, we should kill people because they might have a hard life.
That's everyone.
Yeah, right? That is the fundamental basis of that argument. Is we should kill people because they might have a hard life, and the mother's life might be hard too.
Yeah. And
that is not a viable justification for murder. Yeah. Like, in no other situation is that a viable argument for killing someone, right? You can't be like, man, my kid's eating me out of house and home, so I'm going to shoot him. Cops aren't going to like that.
No,
they're going to show up and be like, did you kill your son? Yeah, I did. Why? I couldn't afford to feed him. Oh, you're good. You're good. That's fine. Yeah. Sorry to bother you, ma'am. Like, in no other situation does that hold up. Yeah. Like, in no other situation is a child being a hardship for you a reason that you can be allowed to kill them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can put them up for adoption.
Yeah.
That's great. If you don't want to take care of a child, if you can't take care of a child, adoption, it's not a perfect system by any means.
No.
But there are an average of 36 families in the U.S. who are looking to adopt for every one child who is actually available for adoption.
Yeah.
So it's not like there aren't people out there. It's not like there aren't people who are looking for a child to take care of. Yeah. You're not throwing them out into the void, right?
No.
So if you really can't take care of a child, that's where adoption comes in. And that's also where having a good church comes in, I'm going to say. Because I'm going to say in any good church, you can probably find at least one person who is willing to open their home to a child who can't find care otherwise.
Yeah. Or even find help in in whatever hardships that you have that you're saying, I can't have a child in this situation. And probably financial help, spiritual help, emotional help. Just any good church is going to have probably dozens of people who want to disciple you and help you.
Right.
Yeah. And then another point that they make that is related to this is that adoption is more painful than abortion. So the killing of a child is harder to take, or easier to take than giving that child up. Because they say, well, they've had 9 months with that child. And I'm like, yeah, they would have 9 months if you don't abort the child.
Yeah, it's... Look, I'm not going to say that giving your kid up for adoption isn't difficult. Because I've heard plenty of stories like mothers who There have been plenty of mothers who have decided to put their kids up for adoption, and then they give birth to the child, hold that baby in their arms, and they're like, I don't want to give up this child.
Yeah.
Because, again, once you're holding them in your arms, once there's no level of detachment anymore, you have no chance to push them away and say that they don't matter, right? I mean, unless you're just a terrible person.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to say the vast majority of these women aren't. There are some who are, and maybe we'll get into that later. But once you're holding that child in your arms, there's no room for you to make excuses anymore. Yeah. There's no room for you to lie to yourself and say X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And
the instincts that God gave a mother is, I want the best for this child in whatever situation they go into. So if that means adoption, that will hurt the mother, yes. But again, she knows it would be better for them, which is hard, because that would be so hard to get up for your child.
Yeah.
But it would be harder to know that you killed them.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And again, adoption is a very hard thing for the mother in a lot of cases. I'm not denying that. But that is still not a justification for ending that child's life.
Never.
It's not okay. That's not okay. And if it's a tough situation, I would say I'm so sorry for you. I feel for you. I can help you find a good church. That's honestly the biggest piece of advice I would give to anyone in any of these situations. Find a good church.
Yeah.
It will help you like nothing but God himself.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a hard thing, and adoption's a hard thing, but that's still not ever a justification for killing anyone.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of other facets to this too, beyond just, it being hard. A lot of people like to get more specific than that. One that I really, not that I enjoy people talking about, but that I think is maybe a little sillier than a lot of other arguments is people say, well, women can't have equal rights with men unless they have the right to an abortion, which, first of all, weirdly, men don't have the right to an abortion. Because
you can't kill your children.
Because, yeah. Why doesn't the man get the right to abortion, right? If you want equal rights. But they say that if women don't have the right to an abortion, then they can't ever have equal rights, equal opportunities with men, which I think is wrong for two main reasons. One, if you don't want to have a child, again, 99% of the time, the answer is don't do the thing that might give you a child.
Yeah.
All right? If you really want to zero in on your career, if you want to make sure that you don't have any children to disrupt things, right? If you really want to make that the focus of your life, your career, your hobby, like whatever, if you just want to live on your own, do whatever you want, if that's really the lifestyle you want to lead and you don't want any complications, then just be abstinent, right?
Yeah.
That seems like a solution.
Yeah.
And if you're not happy with that, maybe it's time to rethink your lifestyle, but you have to understand that that'll come with risks.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why people can't accept that anymore.
I mean, they threatened to do it when Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Right?
And we're all like, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, like follow biblical sexual ethics and you will not have any of these problems that you keep talking about. It's amazing how that works.
Yeah.
So that's the first reason that it's wrong. And the second reason I think it's wrong is because, maybe I will grant that women have a much harder time in the workforce and things like that because of this propensity for them to give birth to children and take care of children, all right? I will allow that is a much bigger distraction for the woman than the man, all right? That's okay. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, it's a beautiful thing.
Right, because guess what? A woman can have a career and a man can have a career. A woman can give birth to and take care of children. A man cannot.
I mean, they can take care of children.
They can take care of, but let's be honest.
Not to the level a woman
Not to the level a woman can. Like, I think there are very few relationships in which the woman does not do at least the vast majority of the direct child care stuff.
Yeah.
Even in a lot of more, we'll say, non-traditional families, I think that's still the case.
Yeah.
Because that's just what the woman's inclinations are, right? And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, I saw, I can't remember who was talking about this the other day, but I was listening to someone talk about this the other day, and they're like, you women keep saying, this was a guy, obviously, he was like, you women keep saying that you don't get to do all of the things that men get to do. You don't get to do all of these important things in society. But I just want you to think about this for a second. You already make all the people. Isn't that like fundamentally the most important thing you could do in society is make the people?
Yeah. And then raise the people.
Right. And then keep the people alive for 18 years? Like, what could be a more fundamentally important thing, and biblically especially a more beautiful thing than like essentially helping create life? And bring that life into the world and usher that life on out into the world to help create more life.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And we've made that like, oh, well, the woman's trapped in the kitchen with the babies and the pregnancy, and it's all terrible, and women don't get any opportunities, and their lives are meaningless.
Yeah, which is insanely ironic, because here the feminist movement saying is women can do anything, women are amazing, and then they're saying, well, in order for a woman to be absolutely perfect, she has to be exactly like a man.
Yes.
What's up there with that? I want to be a woman, not a man. Thank you very much.
Yes. And we won't get too deep into this now because that's a different conversation, but the feminist movement is not what it was. It used to be equal rights, and I think in a lot of ways that was a good movement in society.
Yeah.
But there are no rights that men have that women do not anymore. There is the things like the wage gap, because women objectively do less work than men in 95% of situations. There are things like that. But the feminist movement isn't focused on equality with men anymore. Now they're focused on the idea that women essentially need to become men, and men just need to cower off in the corner and not say anything too offensive, I guess. I never...
become a woman because that's better.
Yeah, I guess. Like, I'm not really sure. Like, I don't even understand what they want anymore. I've never.
I don't think they do either.
I don't think they do either, because I hear like a different thing from every person. The only general thing that I get from the feminists that I've heard speak is women are God's greatest gift to creation, which I don't necessarily deny. But in tandem with that, men are horrible and evil, and we should throw them all in the trash and only bring them out whenever we need them to make more humans, I guess. And I'm like, okay, you've completely missed everything now. And so, but it is somewhat worth talking about, because the feminist movement and the abortion movement overlap
pretty entwined.
Heavily.
Yeah.
So there's that whole notion of basically women can't be equal to men in societal value unless women have the right to an abortion.
Yeah, which is
women cannot. Yeah, women cannot properly pretend to be men unless they can have abortions. So are you trying to convince me, or? Yeah. Anyway, it's an argument that a lot of people like to throw in the mix, and I thought it was worth at least briefly addressing.
Yeah.
Because it is a interesting one.
Yeah.
But the one that they really like to throw out there, the one that they really like to shove in people's faces when they're making the actually you're a terrible person for being pro-life argument, is the cases of rape and incest, right? The cases in which essentially the mother not only does not want the child, but did not willingly take part in any of the actions that
Yeah.
led to the child being there.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is probably one of the worst things that I could imagine happening as a woman. That would be terrible and painful and horrendous. But also, that's still bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. How could I destroy that?
Mm-hmm.
And again, adoption is still an option if you can't stand to look in the face of that beautiful child, then there's always someone who is willing to raise that child for you.
Yeah. And there are a few really big things with this. First of all, yes, that is a horrible situation, and we should feel so much compassion and empathy for those people, and should do everything to help them out in this situation that they're in, and to help them find a good church in which people will help them out.
Yeah.
But those cases that they like to use to defend all abortions are the vast minority.
Yeah.
Only between about 1 to 1.5% of all abortions that take place.
Yeah.
At least in the U.S. I think those are just U.S. numbers, are actually for cases of rape or incest. Mm-hmm. The other 99 to 98.5% are all just people who don't want their child.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about this, you do need to take it seriously.
Yeah.
But you also have to understand that these are the vast minority of cases,
Yes.
and you can't use the 1% to justify the 99%. And
Yeah.
you have to make that clear when you're having these conversations.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's an important situation to address, but it's a fundamentally different situation than the vast majority of abortions, and they can't be the same conversation in a lot of ways.
And you could even say to them, okay, let's come back to that issue later. Let's say, okay, what if we had abortions in those situations? Like, obviously, I wouldn't want to have that still be allowed, but what if we did? What about all the other situations? Would you say still do those? Or, again, just go back to, okay, let's move past this issue because this is obviously one of your favorite arguments.
Right.
And let's see, okay, why do you want abortion so bad, and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. A lot of the time it's important to address it, but often to keep the conversation moving forward past that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, be especially careful because there's always that 1% chance that the person you're talking to was directly or indirectly connected to that specific issue.
Yeah.
And so you have to address that with even more care.
Yeah.
And even more compassion and love for whoever you're speaking to, or it's a conversation you have to be very careful about. But that being said, my fundamental answer to this particular situation, I like to pull from Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 16, which says, "Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin." Right? And so my fundamental answer is, it's horrifying that happens to those women. It's probably about the worst situation that a single human being could ever be in.
Yeah.
And it's a deplorable thing. But we do not punish, we do not kill the children for the actions of their fathers. We do not kill the unborn baby because the man who put it there was a horrible person. That's not a justifiable reason. Just like, in the cases where those children are born, we don't then say that they should, the mean middle schoolers might, but any rational human being doesn't argue that child should be killed because they were a product of rape, right? We don't ever argue that. So why should it be the case for children who are in the womb, right? Why should children who are not yet born be punished for the actions of their fathers when born children shouldn't be?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you want to have an argument about, imposing the death penalty for the rapists, for example, that's a completely different conversation and a completely different issue. that I personally would be for. But it's interesting to me that almost universally the people who are for the death penalty for the child in those situations are against the death penalty for the father who raped the woman and put the child inside of her. Like, it seems so fundamentally twisted and backwards to me that the true criminal, the true perverted human being, should be given sympathy and care and therapy and help, and yet the child who did nothing to be put in the situation that he is in now should be put to death because of the actions of his father. It's an incredible perversion of justice and of, like, the entire societal thought on this issue. Like, it's completely backwards in my mind. And I don't understand how we got this far. It's so bad. So bad.
And we come to the issue of, well, what if the mother is going to die if the child gets to a certain stage of development?
Right.
Which is a incredibly rare, number one, rare case.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, I feel like in most of those cases that I hear, in most of those cases, the woman was trying to get pregnant and she was not able to. And then now her child, if the child gets to a certain stage of development, both the mother and the child would die. And that is hard. And the mother, in that case, it's a balancing act of, well, if we let the baby continue to live, the mother and the baby will die.
Right.
If the baby dies, the mother will live. And so in that incredibly, incredibly hard situation, that would make sense. And it's more, I wouldn't call it self-defense, because it's not entirely self-defense in, like, fighting or whatever.
Right.
But it could be compared to that, because it's choosing, there's two lives. If we do nothing, both will go away, both will die.
Right.
But if we do something, one will live. In that equation, it makes sense. Whereas in most abortions, we say we have two lives. If we do nothing, two will survive.
Right.
If we do something, then only one will survive. That arithmetic just does not make sense.
Yeah.
So, again, it is incredibly hard, and I could not imagine being the mother who had to make that horrible, horrible decision. But, and that painful decision. But,
yeah, it's a horrible thing, and I think, again, it really comes down to kind of what we talked about earlier with the whole thing with the comas and the life support and all that stuff. It's the difference between the prevention of death and the prevention of life, right? Because in the case of, the vast majority of abortions, the natural result would be life. But in the very, very small minority, like we talked about rape and incest being like 1 to 1.5% as an incredibly small percentage. I can't find the exact stat right now, but I remember it being, I think it's 0.5%. You can do your own research, but it's I think it's 0.5%, or it might be even smaller than that. It's like an incredibly small percentage of abortions are for life of the mother, especially with modern medical technology. It's very, very rare. But in those situations, without intervention, the natural result would be death. Which I think is what, even though it's terrible and a horrifying choice to have to make in a fallen world, I think my personal conviction is that abortion can be, I don't even want to say justifiable, but better than the alternative. Because it's, again, preventing someone from death as opposed to preventing someone from life. And that's, I think, the big fundamental difference. But again, you have to realize that even more than in the cases of things, it is an incredibly small minority.
Yeah.
And though the issue does need to be addressed, you can't use it in order to defend the majority.
Yeah.
Because that's obviously ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's like using an appendectomy to defend plastic surgery. Like, two completely different categories of things that have their own discussions and their own arguments, but you can't use one to defend the other.
Yeah.
And so there's so many different complicated facets to this argument and to these issues.
Yeah.
But I hope that we've at least managed to help educate you a little bit on some of the really big issues, some of the really big arguments that people like to use. Yeah. There are a lot of arguments out there on the fringe that we didn't cover that are a little more interesting, let's say. Yeah. But I think we did a pretty thorough job of covering the most commonly used arguments in these discussions, because there is generally a very finite list of these arguments. Yeah. And because, I mean, there aren't that many ways to justify murder.
Yeah.
And so, again, when you're talking about these things, I know we've kind of given you like a pre-programmed list of arguments. Be very careful to actually listen to what they're saying to make sure that you're getting exactly what their argument and their point is in any given conversation when you're talking with people about this. And make sure to answer what they're saying, not to say, oh, that's this argument and the pre-programmed answer for this argument is this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's just foolishness. Don't do that.
And listen, like Gabe said, listen to what they're saying. If you meet someone who is considering getting an abortion, I would say probably leave these behind.
Right.
A majority of these arguments are, okay, you're arguing they're for abortion. I would say, obviously, encourage them to choose life.
Right.
Tell them that their child is a human being and has equal value. But if they have arguments for abortion, again, like Gabe said, get them in a church.
Right. Find
people who will help you disciple them. Get them to a pregnancy shelter that would help them.
Right.
And I'm not saying throw these into the trash when you meet someone like that, because obviously not. But that is a very different situation than meeting someone who supports abortion but isn't actively considering to do it right then.
Yeah.
Or doesn't have someone actively considering doing it.
Right. And I would say on that, you kind of mentioned it briefly, but we do actually have a very good network of pregnancy resource centers in the U.S. So if you can get them to a church, that's amazing. But even if you can't, or even if you can, I would also say highly encourage them to go check out whatever your nearest pregnancy resource center is, because they can help out. Really, the most important thing you can get them is an ultrasound, because an ultrasound of the baby, it removes one of those walls of separation. Like being able to hold, even if it's just a photo of them, being able to hold something in your hands to be able to see that child for the first time is an incredible life-changing thing, and it has saved so many lives.
Yeah. And the ultrasounds are just getting better. They're in 3D. You can actually see your baby's face. I don't think they give them out for the early ones just because at early stages, it is different and harder to see the baby. So, but still, again, this is a picture of my baby. Like, you can go around saying that, saying, here, you want to see my baby? And and it just makes it so different.
Yeah, it's game changing. And, especially if you can't get them to a church, like pregnancy resource centers often also have programs to help women with things like baby clothes or formula or all sorts of things to help and support women who do change their minds and do decide to take care of the child. Or a lot of the times they'll also have connections with people who have openings for adopting children if that's the route they decide to take. And so they're just, we do actually have a very good network of those pregnancy resource centers in the U.S., even though a lot of people like to say that we don't. We actually really do. And I would highly encourage you to, I guess, to encourage them, or I'll encourage you if you're in that situation. I don't know who's listening.
Yeah.
To make use of those resources if you need them, because, I mean, that's why they exist.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of really unique issues with abortion, and there are going to be even more unique aspects to every single individual conversation, every single individual you talk with. And I, as always, highly encourage you to do your own research to flesh out exactly what your particular stance is on the different aspects of this issue, to flesh out exactly what it means for you in your situation, and, you know, with whomever it is in your life who you might need to speak to on these issues, whether it be a friend, a family member, a coworker, whatever it may be. And those are some really difficult conversations that you, I don't know, might be considering having now or might need to have down the line. And so I just encourage you to prepare yourself for those things and to make sure that you have a solid foundation on these issues, because they are, I think, some of the most important conversations that happen in modern culture. Yeah. And it's very important that we handle them compassionately and carefully, and in a way that Christ would be proud of.
Yes. Yeah.
And
speaking the truth in love, because it's hard truth to hear for a lot of people, but they need to hear it.
Yes, they absolutely do. So with that, I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I really hope that you learned something new from this, or at least, have been more solidly founded on what you already knew. I just, hope you got something out of this. Hope you can use some of this further down the line. And I just encourage you, again, to do your own research, have your own thoughts, have your own conversations, and, who knows? Maybe we'll talk more about certain aspects of this in the future, because there are a lot of different little intricate problems that we didn't address, a lot of specific situations that we could get into. Yeah. But for now, we've already, this is already turning into the longest episode we've ever done.
Yes. Yep.
So if you did get something out of this, if you do want to help us out, these conversations are also getting into the territory of things that can get shows like us into trouble, get us flagged on different platforms, get us taken down if we talk about them too much. So more than ever, I would encourage you, if we helped you out, help us out. Yeah. Follow us on social media. We got Facebook at Iron Sparks, or Twitter at Iron Sparks Pod. Follow us on YouTube at Iron Sparks. We got 3 subscribers over there still. Shout out to y'all. And I highly encourage you to check all that out. If you were on the Facebook page, you'd have seen the announcements about the episode date. And I wanna start doing a lot more with the Facebook page too, putting out more announcements, that sort of thing, talking about what we're gonna be seeing in upcoming shows, that sort of stuff. So if you want to get more updates, if you want to be more informed about the show, I highly encourage you to check that out, because I'm gonna be more active on there in the future. And thank you all so much for listening and coming along with us on this journey. And I highly encourage you to continue to think about these issues for yourself. And with that, I think we're going to bid you all adieu. And we will see you guys in a couple of weeks. Normal Saturday publishing date in a couple of weeks for the next episode of Iron Sparks. God bless.